webinar is going to be delivered by, the main presentation of the webinar is going to be delivered by Mr. George Emmanuel from the Belize unit. George is an agronomist, as I said, based in the Belize unit. He holds a Bachelor of Science degree in Agricultural Engineering from the Universidad Agraria de La Habana, Cuba, and a Master's of Science degree in Biosafety from the University of West Indies. In Belize, he's involved in commercial and research activities for cereals, green legumes, and coconuts. Before being deployed to Belize, George spent 6 years as a research assistant in the CARDI unit in St. Lucia, where he was involved in the implementation of the intra-ACP Agriculture Policy Program project. Key aspects of his work involved training farmers, technicians, and extension officers of the Ministry of Agriculture in germplasm maintenance of cassava and sweet potatoes, and the use of small equipment for land preparation and crop maintenance. He was also involved in the deployment of value chains for commodities such as roots and tuber crops, hot pepper, taro, dasheen, ginger, and bananas. Just as worked alongside professionals and counterparts within the Ministries of Agriculture and other partnering research institutions in Central America and the Caribbean, including Jamaica, Trinidad and Tobago, Mexico, and Chile. Under phase 1 of the EU-ACP development of the coconut industry in the Caribbean project, he was an integral member of the project implementation team that conducted capacity building and facilitated training exercises. George led the training sessions on the establishment and management of coconut nurseries for farmers and extension officers in Belize, Barbados, Dominican Republic, Jamaica, St. Lucia, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and Trinidad and Tobago. Under the project, first phase, 28 nurseries were established. Accompanying George in this presentation will be from the Coconut Industry Board, Dr. Wayne Myrie, a very experienced coconut scientist, not only in the region, but known internationally. Dr. Wallace, also of the Coconut Industry Board, another very experienced scientist working on coconut. Dion Clark Harris from CARDI, Jamaica unit, who's done significant work on IPM, nursery establishment and management. And we have our colleagues from the ITC, William Castro and Ben Morrison. This webinar is a joint activity, and we've collaborated with the International Trade Center and the Coconut Industry Board to bring you a webinar on coconut nursery establishment and management. Without further ado, I'll hand you over to George Manuel, the main presenter, and as I indicated, will be supported during the comments, suggestions, questions and answer sessions by Dr. Myrie, Dr. Wallace, and Dion Clark Harris. May I also say during the question and answer sessions, you either place your questions in the chat or you raise your hands so that the moderator can address your needs. George, without any further ado, I'll hand over to you to make your presentation. I expect the host will allow you to share your screen, or they will have your presentation to put up. Denise, can you share the screen with George?
I'm sharing the screen. This is my screen being shared, isn't it? Morning, Greg. Can everybody see the screen? What are you seeing on the screen? Hello? Can you hear me?
Hey, George, we're seeing your presentation, so you can go ahead.
Thank you very much, Denise. Thank you, Dr. Robin, for that generous introduction of me. Thank you, my colleagues from the CIB in Jamaica. Thank you, Dion. And thank you to the participants who have joined in us with us this morning. So, of course, with the introduction, I will be presenting on coconut seed nut nursery establishment and management. And I will begin with a brief introduction, tell you a few about, well, you know, what we've been doing and where we have some stuff on our website. Then I will talk a little bit about the coconut seed. I would want to define it and let you see some of the parts which might be quite interesting for you. Then we will jump straight into what nursery establishment is. Under nursery establishment, we will look at seed selection and how we will store them. We will talk about the site. We will look at some nursery features. We will talk about seed bed preparation and sowing in the seed bed. We will look at some activities which has been ongoing with our work in the region. We will look at other types of technologies with seed beds and pre-nurseries and planting in polybags. Of course, we will talk about the care of the seedlings and why we need to have signs and records. And lastly, we will look at some germination percentages, because in a nursery, the nuts will germinate, and we would want to see what type of results we would have from the work that we have been doing. William, can you put up the first poll? Will we put up the first poll? I think we have a question in the first poll, so I don't know, can we do that now? All right. So while you're responding to that first poll, okay, let's see, almost 70% of you have voted. All right, that is perhaps representative enough of those of you who have voted, and so we have the results. So we have almost half of you without any knowledge of nursery, coconut nursery, and how we manage coconut nursery. So that is good, as we will now share some interesting information on how we go about doing things with coconut nurseries. So,
George, before you continue, can I ask everybody to turn off the videos while George presents? And when you ask questions, you can turn on your video, but keep your video off while George presents. Thank you.
very well, I shall proceed.
Please do.
Very well. So, like I said, in some areas in the Caribbean region, you know, we know that people just pick up coconuts from all over the place, and because of the news coming in the media that coconut water is healthy for you and coconut oil is better for you to use, so a lot of people want to grow coconuts now, and we do have lots of coconut plantations being established. But these coconut plantations are recommended to be established with good quality planting material, and planting material is what we're going to use. So we will want to move away from poor agricultural practices and to see how we can better improve our plantations and the coconut trees in our backyard. A lot of the information that will be presented this morning comes from work which has been done under the project. Dr. Robin spoke to you that we have been working in the Caribbean region with the ITC, the International Trade Center. So we want to give our thanks to them for our EU-funded project. And so we have a few manuals and other pieces of information on our website at CARDI. And so we have the manuals on nursery establishment and coconut production technology, which had been prepared by consultants, Dr. Paul and Compton Paul and Evans Ramkilowang. So let us talk about planting material. The seed is what is the planting material that we're going to use. And seed propagation is one of the oldest techniques in the world. But for coconut, it is, and it continues to remain, one of the most viable options for planting material in coconut production using the seed. We also have other forms of, presenting planting material, and that is in the form of tissue culture material, in vitro culture, but it requires a different management system, and we're not going to be talking about that, I'm sure, perhaps in a later presentation, because we do have persons within CARDI who has done a lot of work and have some experience in that, and even persons like Dr. Mary as well. So, but we're going to be talking about the seed. And what is a seed? And we know that the seed is defined as the ripened ovules of a plant, and that we're going to sow that seed so we can get a new plant, a new being, which is representative of what that seed is. The fertilized ovule of a flowering plant. And coconut trees are flowering plants, and it is that embryo which is capable of germinating. So the coconut seed will germinate, and a seed is a propagative plant structure, such as a small dried fruit. And a coconut, my colleagues, is a seed. Some of us see a coconut, we stop by the wayside and we wait until the guys in the back of the pickup truck can cut open a coconut for us. But what is actually cutting open is a seed, because it is the reproductive part of a tree. And of course, it is a fruit because you have different types of fruit, and a coconut is a fruit because it is a fibrous drupe. And a coconut is a nut, as crazy as it may seem, because the definition of a nut is a one-seeded fruit. So the coconut seed is mature, and it can be harvested when you have a bunch of coconuts and the oldest one shows signs of becoming coffee-like in color, irrespective of the varietal of the coconut. Even if it is yellow, when it becomes mature and dry, it starts to turn into a coffee color. If it is green, when it becomes mature and it's going to become dry, it changes into that brownish coffee-like color. So for tall varieties, seeds mature after between 11 to 12 months, and for the dwarf varieties, 10 to 11 months is what we know from our research, that they become mature and they can be used as seed. Let us take a look at what the seed looks like of a coconut. And credit is from one of the manuals that I indicated earlier, with work done from Mr. Paul and Mr. Ramkilowang. And so in that image you're seeing there on the top left-hand corner, one of the things I want you to pay attention to is that the three sections, the three holes, one of them is a functional pore. I want us to remember that functional pore, because in another couple of slides, we talk about what happens from that functional pore. Below that, you see the embryo exiting that functional pore. Of course, you have an image of what dry tender nuts are like, but on the image to the right, we have a longitudinal section of a germinating coconut, which is a seed. And the reason why it is a seed, if we start from the outside going in, we have the green skin on the outside. In some cases, it might be yellow. In some cases, it might be a bronzish color, orangish in color in some cases. But this is what is referred to as the exocarp of the seed. of a seed. Seed has an exocarp, that is the outer layer. Then we have the mesocarp, which is that fibrous part of the coconut, full of fiber. If you're like me, when you grew up and you go to the bushes, and when you camp out in the bushes, you sleep on mattresses made up out of that fibrous husk. That is the mesocarp of the seed. And then we have the endocarp of the seed, which is that central portion, that main portion of the seed, which is very important to us. And in there, you have the endosperm of that seed, which is the water that you would find in that seed, or the jelly which forms on the, or what we refer to as the coconut meat on the inside of that seed. And that is surrounded by the hard shell, which in seed technology would be known as the tester. Okay, so that is that hard endocarp which covers the inside of that seed, which is the endosperm. But of course, in the image you see, and I'm spending a little time there, you see that spongy mass inside, which as the seed grows becomes larger and larger as it absorbs that endosperm, that water. It becomes a little more, it grows and grows, and it is that form of nourishment for that new plant which would evolve from the coconut. It is referred to as the haustorium, and the haustorium is very, very important for the survival of a new plant derived from the coconut seed. And of course, once again, I want to remind you of that functional pore, of the three little eyes that the coconut, the dry coconut, you will notice after you remove all of that fibrous husk, you see that three little eyes. One of them is a functional pore, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. So a healthy looking seed is going to be coffee-like in color, and it would be free of pests and diseases. So in this image, you see, credit to Ramkilwan and Paul in the manual, what a seed looks like, and when it is piece of that fibrous husk have been removed. So here in the structure of the seed, you'll notice that it germinates. So this is what a seed looks like after it germinates. But after it has been dehusked, from that functional pore that I spoke to you earlier, it would emit its shoot, and the roots will also come out from that functional pore as it grows. So this is where the roots of the coconut come from, as well as the shoot emerging from that functional pore. So it says that rearing of coconut seedlings in a well-maintained nursery would give you good uniform seedlings, and that establishment can be done in 9 or so steps. It begins with the selection of your mother palms for seed nut production. Then you're going to harvest those nuts, store them. You will have to have a site selected for you to do your nursery. You will need to prepare your seed bed, your pre-nursery, your main nursery. You will plant in those things the seed nuts. Then, of course, the other set of steps would be selecting from a pre-nursery into a main nursery bed. So these are some steps which have been recommended. But of course, later on in the presentation, we'll talk a little bit about that, the pre-nursery and the main nursery bed. How we're going to maintain them. This is one of the other steps. And of course, one of the steps is to record, do your signs, and then you will transplant your seedlings into the field, which will be the final stage. So we're going to select coconuts for seeds. Dr. Wallace gave us a beautiful presentation a couple of months ago on how we're going to select the mother palms. So we do know that you need to make sure that you will select seeds to place in your nursery from that we had learned from Dr. Wallace. You mark those trees that you want to use for your seeds. If you're going to go into large plantations, and you would need like hundreds and hundreds of seeds. But of course, you want them to be between 15 to 40 years old, nice and healthy with sturdy, straight stems. And of course, that mother palm would definitely be with many bunches of different ages. And if a coconut is supposed, a coconut palm would give off an inflorescence based on its precocity, sometimes every 3.5 weeks to every month. Then if you have a tree, a mature tree, which is 30 years old and nothing is being done to it, it just bears and bears, then obviously you would find that tree with enough bunches showing various stages of development from 2 months old to full mature coconuts on bunches. So it would have many bunches, about 25 to 30 fully open leaves. That tells you that that is a healthy tree. So we will select those coconuts for seed. You have to have a lot of care in doing that. The mother palm must be very phytosanitary and looking physiologically healthy. We've spoken about that. It is important to know the qualities of the parents of that plant that you're going to take the seed from. If you're going to go into commercial production, most buyers of seeds would want to know what type of mother plants that these seeds or these seedlings would have come from. And of course, they should be exposed to the same types of conditions and climates. And that mother palm that you are choosing your seeds from should be the variety that you yourself want to produce and you would have in your records. Various coconuts exist in terms of varieties. What we know as oil producing varieties in this part of the region, we know them as Pacific tall, the Atlantic tall, which is pretty much becoming non-existent because of some of the diseases and which had been affecting them over time. Then you have the Colima tall, which you'll find on the Mexican side. But we also have what we refer to as water producing varieties, and these are normally referred to as the dwarf varieties, and that is because they are very precoce in bearing. They come into bearing early. We have the Malaya yellow dwarf, we have the Brazilian green dwarf, and we also have dual purposes. And these dual purposes are what is known as hybrids. So you have a Maypan hybrid, a Chactamal hybrid, you have a Brapan hybrid, and these are some of the hybrids which are widely used in the Caribbean region. The hybrids, they exhibit earliness in flowering. They also have increased nut yields because they incorporate some of the characteristics of those which have a lot of nuts. They give good copper production for the making of oils. And well, hybrids, of course, are produced in two ways: by using the female as the parent, one parent, and the male as another parent. So in the case of the Maypan, you use the Malaya yellow dwarf as the female parent, and the tall one, which would be the Panama tall or the Pacific tall, as it is also referred to as, the male parent plant, and you get a Maypan. In a similar fashion, you have the Brazilian Brazilian dwarf being crossed with the Pacific tall or the Panama tall to give you the Brapan and Chactamal in a similar fashion. But of course, you have intervarietal hybrids, which you have crosses between tall varieties and like a tall and a tall, and you also have varietal crosses of dwarf varieties, like a female dwarf as a male, and a female dwarf plant as the mother, and a male dwarf plant as the father parent, to give you that hybrid. So we have tall and tall and tall, and dwarf, and we have dwarf and tall hybrids. Very well. You want to select those that are free from diseases. So in this image, from our sojourns in St. Lucia, we have coconut mite damage on this fruit, and then in another image, we see scale damage on coconuts from the work of Ranculum and pod. And we want to avoid pest-infested nuts. When we were younger, we thought that the scarification on the nuts, as you could see on the image on the left, was a physiological characteristic. But then as we did our research and we grew older, we know that it is as a result of coconut mite damage. So this reduces the size of nuts, and we don't want those to put in our nursery. We can store those seeds for a bit after we have harvested them. Certainly we want to harvest them from the tree where we cut down the branch and we lower it with a rope. We don't want them to fall to the ground because there are seeds, and inside of that seed is where that new plant is going to come from. So you don't want them to be battered and to be thrown around the place because it can cause damage to the embryo, and of course the tester inside can crack, and that is how pathogens can be introduced, and you will no longer have a healthy seed. So we can store them maybe up to 5 layers high. In terms of duration for how long we want to store our seeds after we harvest them before we can take them into our nursery, 10 days is good enough for the dwarf varieties. The taller ones can hold up a little longer, but we want to ensure that we want to sow them in the nurseries as early as possible, 1 to 2 months, depending on the stage of maturity. So our nursery site selection, they should be very well lighted. You must have a lot of light in that area. Although you will use shade cloth to prevent desiccation of the nuts, you want to use an area with good sandy loam soil. You want to have irrigation for your coconuts. Your access roads to your nurseries must be good enough so that when you're moving your seedlings and your seed nuts, that they do not, in some of our farmers' roads are very bumpy, and the knocking around of the seed nuts can cause damage, of course, to the embryo. We do not want the area to be flood prone. If your nursery is flood prone and it is always inundated in water, invariably you will have putrefaction of the seeds because they will become rotting. So we want to have a wonderful nursery full of those sort of things. So in this image, which is one of the nurseries in Belize, this one is in the northern section. We had in our exercises of capacity building for farmers, we have this one. This was a CARDI maintained nursery in terms of upgrading the facilities with irrigation and that sort of a thing. So it must be a good pH between 5.5 and 7. We want to avoid heavy clayey soils because they can become waterlogged very easily. And of course, we want the site to be away from the potential pests, rats and mongoose and possum and those sort of things which they can feast on coconuts. They like coconut seeds, especially when they're germinating, because of that nice apple on the inside, which is very sweet. So you'll have your nursery with, here you would see it has a chain link fencing which goes around to secure it from all sorts of predators and pests, 2-foot pests, including humans who go and steal. The shade cloth to minimize desiccation of the nuts. You would see plants of various stages of development, and of course you would be labeling. So there you would have in a nursery, a general nursery, a pre-nursery, which would be used to obtain uniform planting material prior to you setting them in a nursery proper. Nursery facilitates sorting of seedlings by age, by color, especially if you have multiple varieties in your nursery. And of course, it is very good to identify of types. If you're doing hybrids, for example, it is very important that which doesn't conform to the specifications that you are looking for. So you have pre-nursery, your main nursery area, multiple plants, multiple sections of plants of different stages. Your nursery area should be
George, I'm not hearing you.
Can you guys hear me? I must have lost connection for a bit here.
Yes, George, we hear you. Go ahead.
All right. Sorry about that. So I think this is where I lost connection for a bit on training, making sure that the manpower is trained. Is this where I lost you?
Yes, George.
Very good.
If you can put back the slides, we're not seeing the screen now.
George, we lost you and we lost the presentation also. So please sort that out with.
Yeah, just give me a second. We're at the mercy of technology here.
Go ahead.
Very well. Okay, so I may have lost you right here, somewhere thereabout. So we're talking about the nursery must have security fencing, a shade cloth. You will have plants of different ages and manpower trained to carry out the activities. So the nursery bed preparation, the seed bed in which you are going to sow your seeds would be approximately 2 meters wide, which is what has been recommended in our manuals. The distance between two seeds along the row is about 15 centimeters long. 15 centimeters is like about half of the length of a ruler. You know, the 12-inch ruler that we use at school. So 15 centimeters is like half about that. The distance between rows is a little more than that, 15 to 20 centimeters. You place trenches in your seed bed and you set your seed nuts in those trenches with the embryo end at the top. As you can see in this image,
George, we're not hearing you. We lost your audio.
we want to mulch our seed beds with the same coconut coir, that husk of the coconut. So as I was saying, different schools of thought in how seed nuts are planted. Some are set horizontally, some are set vertically, and some are set diagonally or slightly tilted. Of course, in all cases, we have the embryo end at the top. We have research being done in which we will talk about that a little bit, the advantages and disadvantages based on what has been discovered. We can set them diagonally, as you can see here, horizontally with the flat end down, or vertically. Of course, in all cases, in the vertical and the diagonal or slightly tilted, we have the embryo end up. And we have seen in some of the research, according to Paul and Ramkilowang, they say that vertically planted seed nuts, they suffer more from drought and are less robust than those from flat or horizontal planting. Even if you might notch them, where you cut off a piece of the husk, which might aid in the germination, but especially if it is with the dwarf cultivars, they may appear to be a little more robust. And from the slides here, we see a second evaluation is being repeated. This is the second season. That is work that is ongoing. So in the photos where you're seeing there, our CARDI work ongoing at Nocalva Nursery in Jamaica, where they have come up with results stating that the seeds which have been planted diagonally apparently would germinate a little earlier than the horizontal, and the vertically planted oriented nuts would have germinated last. So this is an interesting research ongoing in Jamaica at the Nocalva Nursery. The seed nuts which have not germinated after 5 months, they should be removed. So in this image, you see that the nuts are set where they are. You have 5 nuts in a row, and you have them in a fashion that you can easily reach the nuts, that you don't step over the nuts while they're in the nursery when you need to work with them, that you can reach them easily, and you can do your selection of what has germinated from what has not germinated. And this is where we talk about advantages of having a pre-nursery and a main nursery. So in that pre-nursery, all the varieties must be the same, should be around the same age, easy access, 50 to 20 nuts per row. If you are not going to use irrigation, if you have no irrigation system set up and it is only going to be rain fed, you set your seed nut nursery at the onset of the rainy season. So in the case of us in the tropics and the northern tropics, the rainy season coincides with the hurricane season. So by the end of May into June, you could be setting your nursery. If you have irrigation and you have a market for seed nuts, then you can set it up at any point in time. After 5 months, you would select seed nuts and set them in your main nursery. These should be those with only a single sprout, a sturdy stem, and it should be well set into the husk. And of course, those seedlings should be free from diseases, which we'll talk about a little lower down in the slides. So you will remove those with a spade. You set the spade under the seed nut, and there you pry it up off the ground. You trim off the roots, and then you can set it now in your main nursery, burying it about 1/3 deep in the soil. Or we also have polybagging the seeds after they have germinated in a polybag nursery. And this has its importance in that when you're going to now transplant into the field, then you don't have that shock and traumatization which they can suffer. It is advantageous as well to have them in polybags because they can stay longer if you have adverse conditions for your field for planting. So, and then you can do your selection easily in terms of age and size of your seedlings. In setting in the polybags, the emerging shoot must be, of course, set in only one direction. Your polybag seedlings are set to the date as they have germinated. So those which germinated in May, those which germinated in June, and that sort of a thing. And you can set them in a north to south direction with the first row on the eastern side, which is the area which the sun rises. So there is no competition for sunlight. So all of this placing in your nursery is important, especially when you're setting up polybags. Of course, the vigorous seedlings would be the ones which are selected. And if you're going to cull and you want to judge by age, polybagging facilitates that. So you set out from your seed bed or your pre-nursery, and you set them into your main nursery. This image, of course, is taken from one of the manuals, and there you see for you to set up your polybags, you use a mixture of rice hulls and compost and all of those sort of materials, potting mix, which are placed in the seed bag, and the seed nut is placed in there, and then they can remain about 2 months together until they have caught up themselves, and then you separate them into the wider spacing that you will use in your nursery. There is maintenance to take place in polybags and in the nurseries as well. So you want to water the seedlings. You will weed the polybags to keep them free from the grasses and little weeds which will grow in there. And of course, you will do your inspection, regular inspection for pest and disease incidents. We talk about fertilizing a bit. We have research being done in different areas. In the Philippines, they talk about using a mixture of fertilizers for your seed bags in the nursery. You apply it directly in the soil after 6 months, then leaf splitting would occur, and then the seeds would be ready for planting into the fields. But they talk about using ammonium sulfate at 20 grams, and yeah, there is this slide. Yeah, potassium chloride or sodium chloride after 2 months of germination. So you have that amount, that number, that is what is recommended for the seed nuts in the seed bag. Paul and Ramkilo also make recommendations for fertilizing in the nurseries, where they talk about using 1 unit of urea and trisodium phosphate and mix it directly in the soil. So we do have areas where they talk about using fertilization in nurseries, although we do know that there are some nurseries which do not recommend uses of fertilizers in nurseries. Then we have studies from Embrapa, where they use the bare root system and suggest planting after 4 to 7 months. And it is important that we just take a little note of this as well, because they too have done studies, and they're suggesting that because the seedlings have a smaller leaf area, they are able to withstand adverse conditions better, and they would have a greater chance of survival, because they transpire less, and they have a larger reserve in the endosperm, which is that haustorium that we spoke about, and so that they can survive at that rate. So they've done studies where they looked at planting directly from the seedbed into the field without separating them from the pre-nursery into the nursery. So Fontes and Leal in 1988 did some work where they looked at the advantages of using younger seedlings. And of course, they would have done this on using the same type of selection criteria, which is based on germination speed and seedling vigor. What we always look for when we use the seed bed and the seed nursery is precocity. The ones which precocity is there's a correlation between precocity and production. The earlier the seed nut germinates, the more prolific we're told that the tree will be, and they will be healthy and bearing. So in their studies, using traditional and alternative nursery system, they use 3 sowing densities of 15, 20, and 30 seeds per square meter. And they observe the superiority in a lower planting density in relation to the traditional treatment. So we have notices of how you set the seed and how it germinates, how quickly it germinates, and of course in planting density. So there is this image from Revista Brasileira Fruticultura in 2019, when they did some advances in the density in nurseries. So we have photo credits from Funds 2019 showing, and their research said that the lower density apparently they observe superiority in terms of the way in which the plants perform based on the observation, using younger seedlings, they said, and placing them directly into the field with those sowing densities. This timeline tells you, based on what we have discussed, the sowing of the seed nut in the nursery, the pre-nursery, and in the main nursery. After 3 months, you would have your germination of dwarf nuts. At the end of 4 months, you would have germination of the taller varieties. So between 2 and 4 months, your tall varieties would germinate. Between 1 and 3 months, your dwarf varieties should germinate. And of course, remember, we were looking for precocity. The earlier they germinate. So then by the end of 5 months, which is a time when you would go from your pre-nursery into your polybagging or to setting it into the main nursery, you would do that like at 5 months. And then it would stay for an additional 4 to 5 months. Sometimes it might be longer if the adverse conditions, which is why we spoke about polybagging. So by the end of 8 to 9 months, they are ready to take out into the field based on the recommendations that we had from Paul and Rankilowa. Although we're seeing now that Embrapa is suggesting a shorter space of time. We will care them. We want to set them in such a way that there is adequate root room for the roots to develop, that there is drainage, and you can inspect and do your maintenance in, in that nursery. We want to make sure that nurseries which are prepared on the ground, weed management is done twice a month, especially if they're in open field and they're exposed to the conditions and they're rain fed. You want to mulch them for hot and dry periods. And of course, you use your coconut coir for that. And you have to manually weed them. So if your seed bed is too large and you can't reach across from either end, then that means you have to step over the nuts and get in there and to keep them weed free. And you don't want that, which is why we suggested beds which are approximately 2 meters wide. You need to inspect those things regularly, the seedlings regularly, because looking at them, you might see them looking beautiful, nice and green, but on the underside of the leaf is where you will find scale insects, whiteflies, mealybugs, and you need to inspect them regularly. So as we went around training officers who to do the inspections, we will see under the side of leaves in the photo on the extreme left, upper left-hand corner, there you see an underside of a leaf showing some scale insects, whiteflies, red palm mites, and the others. So you do your regular inspection. Sometimes you may need to use, with the aid of magnifying glasses and those sort of things. Then you can take pieces of leaves to your laboratories and place them under the stereoscope, and you will see that if you inspect them. So here in a training session and you will see that these plants are almost ready to go out into the field after having spent there. They would have spent like 8 months already in the nursery and were all ready to be distributed. And so we're looking on the underside of the leaves to see how healthy they are before they are taken out into the field. So this is another nursery which has been upgraded under the first phase of the project with the assistance of CARDI. You will have to have signage and records. As a coconut producer, as a producer of coconut seedlings, in your office, you would have your records, but out in the nursery, you need to have your signboards which says what is the name of the variety that you have, where the seeds would have come from, the dates which they have planted, the number of nuts that you would have sown. All of these would be in your records, and in seedbed 1, seedbed 2. Seedbed 1, you have this variety. Seedbed 2, you have another variety. In seedbed 3, you would have the same variety, but it's older and that sort of a thing. So you have your records and your signage, which is very important for producers when they come to your nursery, they want to buy. Before we end the presentation, we can talk a little bit of some of the results we've had. So in the image here, you have the image at the top is Hope Nursery in Guyana. So all over the region, CARDI was involved in managing some nurseries. So in the region, we have nurseries which are actually co-managed by CARDI and ministries and those which are managed privately. But we do have those that we work with. In the bottom image, you have Nocalva Nursery. So that image shows you the first set of germination. In an earlier slide, we spoke about the ongoing and the second evaluation of the orientation of the nuts. But what is interesting is that if we look at the results, so at this nursery in the north using Chactimal variety, we have a germination percent of 61. In Belize, Stan Creek, in the central area, we had Malaya Yellow Dwarf. We have a 75% germination percentage. We also have Chactimal with a 60% germination. And at the Nocalva Nursery, where we have a Mapan variety, that's another hybrid, which shows a 61.9% germination. So it is consistent with what we've been seeing, how we manage in the nurseries, the type of management that we do. Of course, we don't expect every seed nut to germinate. But if you have a germination percentage of 60 and up, I think you would be doing well, according to research. So thank you very much for your attention. You can visit us at CARDI, Instagram, on YouTube. You can Twitter us and find us on Facebook. And I take this opportunity to wish all of the colleagues happy International Year of Plant Health 2020. Thank you very much once again.
Okay, George, thank you for your presentation. Thank you for your presentation. Before we go into the question and answer sessions, we have three very experienced scientists who have in-depth knowledge on nursery establishment and management. We have Dion Clark-Harris from CARDI, Dr. Wayne Myrie from the CIB, and Dr. Millicent Wallace from the CIB. I will ask them to make some brief comments because, as we know, the CARDI ITC Coconut Project did put up some recommended packages for coconut nursery establishment and management. This is not necessarily the only methods for doing such. So I will ask my colleagues, starting with Dion Clark-Harris, just to make some brief comments in support of the presentation that George has made, or it can be to slightly add or give some further explanations as to why another method may be slightly more appropriate depending on the conditions you're in. So I will hand over first to Dion Clark-Harris to make some brief comments, then I'll ask Dr. Wallace and then Dr. Myrie.
Thank you, Dr. Robin.
Dion, please make some brief comments.
Yes, good morning, colleagues. Good morning, everyone across the region and the world. I see we have quite a representation here. Yes, you would see that in some of the pictures that have been present. And so a lot of what George presented, I would have been a part of it in the project that we partner with the ITC to implement. And also the Coconut Industry Board, although operating in Jamaica, has been also very instrumental in the regional project in all the participating countries in some shape or form. So yes, we were guided by the desktop research that was done by Dr. Compton Paul and Evans Ramkelwan, and we chose from that a package of recommendations to implement, to set up nurseries across the region. So that is what you would have seen. And we have sort of looked at going straight from pre-nursery, having the pre-nursery nursery in one setting to minimize the shock that seedlings are exposed to when you transplant them twice. In fact, when you do the pre-nursery, then to the nursery, then from the nursery to the field. So we have done that in Nocalvo. So what we want you to focus on in this presentation is that the coconut, although it is a very large and seemingly invincible structure, is a seed. And that's why so much emphasis was placed on looking at the structure of the coconut that we eat and drink as a seed to be protected. And so take away from this presentation that what we want to do in nursery establishment and maintenance is to provide the most favorable environment for a healthy seedling, which is going to be your planting material going into the field to be produced. That is the takeaway message from all of this. And you do it according to what is cost effective and what is site specific, depending on what your capacity is as the person producing these seedlings. So in a nutshell, that's what I would say. But I also want to correct Mr. Emmanuel that the last picture in the last slide is the Jamaica structure at Nocalvo, both photographs. In a previous one, we had the Hope Nursery in Guyana. So just to make that correction, we partner with the Nocalvo Polytechnic College in Jamaica in doing that nursery, which supports the CIB's mandate to distribute planting material to the growers in Jamaica. So that's what I would have to say. Thank you very much.
I will now ask Dr. Wallace if she has any comments, to make some comments. Dr. Wallace?
Can you turn my camera on, please? I'm trying to get the camera on. On my video. Good morning again. Are you seeing me and hearing?
Yeah.
Okay.
Dr. Wallace, we can. Thank you.
Okay. First of all, I'd like to say to Mr. Emmanuel that it was a fantastic presentation. I like the detail. He went into quite a bit of detail, practical details that will help the farmer and also somebody not very technical. I really like that part. I like the whole presentation. I have a couple of comments though. I think you said the width of beds would be 2 meters. I might ask you to review that because for someone stretching across a whole meter to get to the middle of the bed, it might be a little strenuous. And what we really don't wish to happen is that someone climbing into the bed to get at the plants in the middle of the bed. So if I heard correctly, 2 meters might be a bit wide. The second comment on the orientation of seedlings. Yes, when they are planted vertically, there might be a problem, especially if you're planting in the ground nursery and you're trying to lift and transport. You're going to hold the seedlings by the petioles, and we found that there's some damage that can occur there. However, if you're going straight from the pre-nursery to the polybag, then you can get away with that. So it wouldn't be a problem in that case. You said something again about 8 months after planting. For polybag, fantastic. Up to 2 years, fantastic. But if you're in the ground and it's not a drought time, those seedlings can become what we call overgrown, and then there may be difficulty transplanting them. So I would draw the line at 6 months personally for the ground nursery. Thank you very much. Like I say, fantastic presentation, very informative. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Wallace. I will ask Dr. Myrie to make some comments, and then I also would like, from a slightly different perspective, Ben Morrison to make some comments on the nursery work in the Alliance. Though it's not a research or activity, but the nursery work in the Alliance is a very important starter component of the whole process, and probably Ben could make some comments on that after Dr. Myrie. Over to you, Dr. Myrie.
Thank you very much, Greg. Good morning to everyone. Thanks, Mr. Emmanuel, for this presentation. It was a good presentation. Are you seeing me? Okay, yes. Just a couple of observations. You mentioned polybags. I would suggest that you could look at that again, because from our experience, if you put it in polybags for an extended period of time, the roots actually goes through the polybags and go into the ground. And hence, when you're going to do your transplanting, there's a difficulty there in removing the plants for transplanting. I know it's very popular to use polybags right across the coconut growing regions. But what we have found is if you use cloth bags, there are some special cloth bags that if you use those type of bags, the roots will stay confined within the bag and not protrude into the ground to cause that problem. Secondly, what we have found here in Jamaica when we are setting seed nuts in a nursery is you have in areas where you have or you have leaf spot diseases, you tend to want to make sure that you don't have long beds, that's not broken up in small portions. So what we generally suggest is that, for example, you would set a bed by either using 5 seed or 5 to 6 seeds in width and about 10 seeds in length. What that does is, and then you have a break between that setting, and then you set again 5 seeds in width, 10 seeds in length. What that does is when the nuts are germinated and they are exposed to leaf spots, for example, you have 1 or 2 seedlings within one portion of the bed being affected by leaf spots, it does not transfer. So you can isolate that bed, and you can do your general maintenance, such as control measures that you do, whether you'd use fungicide or spraying, or you would do culling, so that you don't have all the seedlings in the beds affected by the leaf spot disease. So I think in going forward, I think you should incorporate that. It's very important because in most of the regions, most of the countries that we are talking about, they have different types of leaf spot, Pestilotia, Dreschleria, etc. And those leaf spots, while not severe enough to kill the plant, one, you have stated correctly so that the seedling should be free from leaf spots and other pests and diseases when they're being transplanted to the field. So those are my few words. Thanks.
Thanks, Dr. Myrie. I think now between your presentation, George, which was a very good detailed presentation, and the comments by Darren Clark-Harris, Dr. Wallace, and Dr. Myrie, we have a comprehensive production package of nursery establishment and management. I will ask Ben Morrison from the ITC to just make some comments with respect to the nursery establishment and the alliances that we had started. Ben?
Yes, thank you very much, Greg, and good morning, everyone. I think it's been a very productive discussion so far, so thank you to George for the presentation, and also to Dr. Myrie, Dr. Wallace, and Dion Clark-Harris for the comments. So obviously at ITC, we're focusing on leveraging trades of coconuts from the region and within the region. So we're also looking at how the nurseries can be established from a commercial perspective. So in that sense, what we have done in the first and second phase of the project is also apply business models to how the nurseries are established. More specifically in Jamaica, for example, we have carried out an investment prospectus, which also includes a model for the seedling business. Taking that practically into the field, we've also worked with CARDI, with CIB, and with institutions, national and regional institutions in the Caribbean, to establish nurseries as commercial ventures on what we call lead farmer plots. So these nurseries are established according to the guidelines that have been presented, but also respecting national protocols that may be in place. Obviously, George and Wayne and Dr. Wallace touched on some of the differences that there may be in establishing nurseries in different countries within the region. And essentially what our role is as ITC, working together with CIB and CARDI, is to also bring buyers and investors to the field in order to establish that market connection or alliances between the farmers or seedling businesses in order for them to establish that connection to sell their seedlings as an alternative livelihood stream or income stream. Thanks, Greg, and back over to you.
Thank you, Ben. We now covered the research, development, and the commercialization of nurseries. I now open the floor for questions, suggestions, comments based on what you've heard. The floor is open. I have gone through the chat. I haven't seen any specific questions in the chat. So you could raise your hands and I will ask you to go ahead with your question or comment. While we're waiting on questions or comments from the floor, I made some notes. And one of the questions I wanted to ask to my colleagues on the panel, at what stage do you harvest a seed nut from the tree to put in storage or to place in the seedling nursery? At what stage do you harvest that seed nut?
Dr. Robin, I can begin by attempting to answer your question, and I'm sure my other colleagues too could contribute as well. With taller varieties, the the nuts are ready when they're 9 or 10 months old, and they're harvested for water purposes. That's the normal tall varieties that we have around the region, the Panama tall and some of those Pacific tall varieties. But at 11 to 12 months, the nut is fully mature then. Or what we would notice is at 11 to 12 months in the taller varieties, the older bunches on the tree, you would have the bottom nuts, which would have been evolving first out of that inflorescence, would begin to change in that coffee-like color, light brown, becoming a little brownish. So that is when it is determined that the nuts are ready for harvesting. With the precoce varieties, the dwarf varieties, they too, at 7 to 8 months, some of them have been harvested for water purposes. And of course, how the earlier you harvest them is also a determining factor in the sweetness of the water, the amount of bricks that the water has. But by 9 to 10 months, they're mature as well to harvest. So for tall varieties, they're ready and mature for harvesting at 11 to 12 months. And that is also based on what research has said. And for the dwarf varieties, they're ready for harvesting a little earlier, up to 9 to 10 months.
Just a follow-up question. If you do not have a track on the age of that nut on the tree, is there some physical morphological appearance that can indicate maturity?
Well, like I said earlier, the older nut on that bunch, which would be ready, would begin changing from its varietal characteristical color. So if it is a yellow variety, it begins to change from yellow to brownish. If it is a green variety, it begins to change color. So on the tree itself, you would notice that the nut is changing color physiologically, and it is mature. There is another characteristic which would involve counting the bunches and inflorescence on that tree. So if it is a tall variety, you would have 10 to 11 bunches which are younger than that one, based with beginning with the smallest nut which would evolve from that inflorescence. So you know that bunch is approximately 11 to 12 months. And similar for the dwarf varieties, as I made mention of, because physiologically it is characteristic of coconuts to emit an inflorescence every almost 4 weeks, like between 3 to 4 weeks. Some precoce varieties like every 3 weeks, 3 weeks and a few days. But ballpark figure speaking, like almost every month a new inflorescence would be emitted in a tall variety. Of course, I would like to hear what Dr. Mary and my other colleagues would have to say on that. But based on what we have done and what we've seen in the research, 11 to 12 months is for the tall varieties to be mature, and in the dwarf, 10 to 11 months after the emergence of an inflorescence for that seed to become mature.
All right, thank you, George. I'm still not seeing any questions in the chat.
I think there is a raised hand.
And I haven't seen any hands going up yet.
There is a Robert Maloney with a raised hand, thanks, sir.
Okay, Robert Maloney, can you go ahead with your question, please? Robert.
Yes, are you hearing me?
First,
yes.
Give your name and the institution you work for.
Yes, my name is Robert Maloney, and I'm calling from Barbados, representing the National Coconut Stakeholders Platform. My question, is there a nursery established in Barbados? The last time we had spoken with CARDI, we had spoken about the establishment of a nursery here in Barbados. We was importing some nuts and some seedlings, I think from Belize or somewhere in Guyana at that time. So up to date, do y'all know if there have been an establishment of a nursery here in Barbados? Because the coconut industry here is growing exponentially due to the climate change as well as the layoff due to the COVID-19. Many persons are now engaging in the coconut industry. But one of our main problems that we find is a lack of the land being designated for the cultivation of the coconut trees and the industry, as well as the planting material, mainly sourcing the coconuts or the seedlings. So the vending community and the coconut planters would like to know, is there a industry or nursery, excuse me, established in Barbados up to date? Thank you.
Okay.
Go ahead, Dion.
Yes, I noticed that my colleague from Barbados is not on because he had a previous and another engagement rather. But the Barbados as a participating country came on late in the first phase of the project, very late in fact. We came into Barbados and we did a training on nursery management. George actually did that presentation there as well. And I was there presenting on IPM. But subsequently, the ministry imported some seed nuts and they were established in polybag nurseries in the ministry's property, and some were kept in CARDI's facility as well. And those seedlings were distributed. They imported, I think, about 6,000 nuts, if my memory serves me correctly. And so subsequently, I don't know of another follow-up to that. As I said, that was done late in the first phase, and we are now early in the second phase of the project. But we anticipate that additional seed nuts will be established for distribution.
Well,
Dr. Robin, if I may.
Robert, we can get you a response from the CARDI rep before the end of the day on that matter.
Now, Dr. Robin, if I may add, I know also that Sarah is not here and Brian as well. I'm aware of the recent work they have been doing in Barbados. What they have been doing lately is they're in the field trying to identify good mother palm to populate the nursery. So two nurseries actually, the CARDI's nursery in their station and also at the ministry, and then also to replicate this at the lead farmer level. So they have gone out to the field to do some surveys to potential lead farmers. They have also been doing this in partnership with the Ministry of Agriculture to trying to identify good mother palm in Barbados. So the idea is then to do a training, take the farmers to so we can all learn how to identify a good mother palm, and then after that replicate and populate the nurseries at the ministry level, at the CARDI level, and then replicate at the farm level itself, at the lead farmer level.
Thank you, William. So Robert, you have a response there from William Castro Rodriguez of the ITC, who's actively involved in the Alliance for Action on the ground in Barbados. Any more questions from the floor? Comments, suggestions? We've been going for just about an hour and 20 minutes. So if I don't see any more hands or any questions in the chat, I'm assuming that everyone is satisfied with the presentation and the support comments from our colleagues from CARDI, CIB, and the ITC.
Okay, well then, Greg, Dr. Robin, we have a poll of feedback on the screen now, of which the participants should indicate the satisfaction with the content of the webinar.
Yeah, I can see that. Well, I think the webinar's feedback indicates a very successful webinar. 64% were very satisfied, 37% satisfied. There's 5% very dissatisfied, and I would really like to know why. So can someone who indicated that they were very dissatisfied indicate, because that can only help the project personnel, the scientists, and the ministries in the way forward. I'd really appreciate if somebody could indicate why they were very dissatisfied in there. I want to call this webinar to a close. Let me thank again the main presenter, George Emmanuel from the CARDI Bellies unit, the support cast of eminent scientists in coconut nursery establishment and development, John Clark Harris, Dr. Millicent Wallace, and Dr. Myrie, and of course, our colleague from the ITC who works in the Alliance for Action, Ben Morrison. William, thanks for the support also. And let me thank our hosts, organizers at CARDI head office, Dennis Bisai, for ensuring that all went well during the webinar. Thank you, and I bring this webinar to a close.